Welcome to Art Lounge.
So, what's Art Lounge? A space for artists, ones inspiring, or those who enjoy it, to come together and share ideas, thoughts, expression, and creation. So, whether you're an illustrator, writer, musician, a sculptor, comedian, dancer, architect, or someone who enjoys art in general, this space is for you. I'll be streaming daily with a mix of content, and in the near future, I'll be announcing different opportunities for you to participate in. For this half of the stream, I'll be sharing ways you can improve your drawing skills. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in again. This is going to be the Figure Drawing Basics Part 3. I will be showing you guys, for the beginning of the stream, I'll be showing you guys the 7-head division of the human figure. So you'll see how the head fits into all the different parts of the body. Just give me 1 second. Make sure that it's in focus. I did notice that from the previous streams, the pad kind of traveled its way down. I didn't really notice it, so it's kind of helpful to have this tape over here to let me know, okay, it's going down. Time to bring it up again. All right, so let's get this. Let's get started. So just like all the other streams, the best way to start is with the circle. And the size of it is going to be your unit of measurement for the rest of the body. So I'm kind of like taking a shortcut here. I'm doing both the chin area and the top of the head, but just for example, I'll show you guys starting out with the circle and then adding that cup shape on the bottom for the chin. So from there, and with this one, we're going to do it in profile. So the crosshair isn't going to be right in the middle, but we are going to include it for various reasons. But one of them, the most important one, and I also noticed this when it comes to people who are starting out or even people who are intermediate, they don't really pay attention to the balance of their figure. Like, is it kind of tilted towards the left or the right? Is it leaning too much towards the front? And even though it could seem sort of right, if you were to look at it, it kind of looks awkward when the character, the figure, is leaning. It's meant to be standing straight, but it's kind of tilted more towards the left or the right. So it just looks uncomfortable. It doesn't look that great. And part of, wanting to draw well is you want to portray interesting poses, strong understanding of anatomy and balance and proportion. That just is more pleasing to the eye. You know, we look at people and we study their facial features and their body language, and it conveys a certain tone, or it conveys a certain feeling. So the same applies to when you're drawing, right? When you're drawing the character, when you're drawing the figure, it portrays by the end, like once you get down to the feet, or once you get close to finishing it, it portrays a certain mood, a certain feeling, or an attitude. So you want to make sure that you're aware of that as you're drawing, and you're not just focused on just the anatomy as well. But you know, this is the learning process, so even if you're not getting it right, it's just something to keep in mind. It's something to at some point revisit and take note of and be like, okay, is it balanced? Is the figure proportionate? So I'm showing you guys using the ruler how important it is to train your eye to be used to getting used to like seeing the body in proportion. So for now, as you're learning it, it's good to do this, and then once you get it down on your sketchbook, once you draw these guidelines and once you draw this figure out and these like measurements, you can always just flip back to it, right? And you could be like, all right, well, here it is. This is the measurement. This is where the head is supposed to be in comparison, and this is where the chest is supposed to be in comparison to the head, etc., etc. And you could just like go back to your project, whatever you're working on. You can, once you memorize that, you can be like, okay, let me make sure that it's like that on this project that I'm working on. So I'm gonna do these little measurements, and then we'll draw according to those measurements. So from here to here, from here to here. So we got 1, 2, 3, and this is gonna be the 7 head measurement. Oops. Now my ruler, the numbers are kind of worn out, so it's a little bit more difficult, and like the lines are kind of worn out, so it's a little more difficult to measure it exact. But when you guys get your ruler, it's gonna be new, brand new, so you won't have that same problem. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it just makes it easier once you draw them out, as opposed to like first drawing the first line, drawing the head, then drawing the body. You know, this sets your limits pretty much. So you know, okay, past this line, the knee shouldn't go, or like that. The shin shouldn't be longer or shorter past this line. It's kind of good to provide that in the beginning. So up to this, from here to here, this is like where the chest is. And then from here down to here, this is where the waist would be. So from like the neck down to the waist, it's 2 heads. That's the torso. And it's also, that line is also like where the shoulder kind of ends. And the rest of the arm begins. Now we're using just basic shapes to create the skeletal structure again, just so that you're not overwhelmed with like going into too much detail in the beginning. You want to first sketch this out so that it's not that much of a hassle. Using a little foreshortening here to show you guys, it really is the principle of just using the cup shape. See, it's like it's still present there, and understanding that. And you could just even do that at home, find yourself a cylinder shape or a cup shape and then put it on the table and put it in perspective and try to draw it out. It's fairly simple if you start out with the circle, and then depending on the perspective, like if it's away from you, the opening of the cup is away from you, this would be the base of it, and then this would be the opening of it. Whereas in reality, it could be a lot taller. This is kind of like tilted at an angle, not laying flat, but like on a surface that's also sort of tilted. If you were to draw out like what the surface was like. So just to understand a little bit of the foreshortening on here. And it's a great way to practice it, to understand it better and better. I mean, it's one thing to look at it, but it's another when you're actually sitting down to draw it and having your hand be able to replicate what you're seeing. It's that hand-eye coordination. So whereas this hand is going to be, or this arm rather, is going to be further straight down. And it's a fairly simple pose just to demonstrate like how the head fits into the body. So from what we got so far, we got from the chin down to the chest, that's one head. Then from the chest down to the waist area, that's two. And then from the waist down to the groin area, that would be your third head. Now this part gets tricky because depending on whether you're doing 7 heads or 8 heads, this part would be different. You would be measuring almost like 2 heads for the top half of the leg, whereas whereas for the 7 heads, it's 1 head. I'm giving these cylinders a little bit more definition, just to demonstrate where the prominent muscles are, in order to really distinguish them from each other and make it look more human, more natural, rather than just plain cylinders. But you could use that as well for now, just so that you understand the proportion of it. So the feet are very important, and I noticed that a lot of people make the mistake as well. When it gets down to the feet, they haven't drawn them enough, and sometimes they either make them way too small or way too big. Most of the cases I noticed, from what I've noticed, be like way too big. So that's another important detail to look out for, that you don't make the same mistake. You also you want to make sure that the hand reaches like right about half of the leg and isn't like way up here where like the fingertips cut off where the groin is. Then you know you've made a mistake. When your fingertips are reaching just the bottom of the groin, then your arms are way too short. Going to take a little bit of time defining this more, but as you could see, for the most part, we've established the limits, right, and tried to draw within those limits, and most importantly, keeping it light in the beginning, so that if you end up drawing it like way off the marks, then you could erase it and the line isn't going to bother you and get in the way of like you trying to establish the new lines for the figure to correct it. And it really does help to draw through transparently, just so that you can understand the curve to the hand when it comes to foreshortening. You know, when you're drawing, let's say if you wanted to draw it again for shortening, you don't want to make it too narrow. Sometimes it helps to draw through and picture where the opening and how it's laying. And that way, this line right here is correct. Same thing for this one. And they both have to match. Like, you can't have one that's like way more narrow and then this one is really short. And that's kind of what this guide is about. It's like once you draw the circle and it's like see-through, this is the other side. And this is, well, this would be the other side as well. Once you draw this, then you know the top over here is gonna have to follow the same curve. So it kind of helps maintain the right perspective on both. I'll just draw them through here, and because this is tilted down further away from you, from the eye, and more down towards the floor, it becomes more narrow. That circle at the base becomes more narrow. And also notice that the shape isn't the cylinder shape. It's not a perfect straight line, you know, for the leg, for example. It's tapers towards the bottom. So if you're drawing the leg and it ends up looking like this, you're off on the anatomy for it. You want to learn the real shape of the leg, which tends to curve in towards the knee. Another little tip on making sure you're drawing it correctly or it starts to look right. And the same thing for the knee. For the knee, it starts off right about the same width as the base of the leg, and then tapers off towards the bottom. Just draw it through. This is where the knee would be. But as you could see, where it tapers off at the bottom of the leg is not the same width as at the bottom of the thigh. It's more narrow. So you don't want to draw it about the same. Like if somebody's drawing the width ends up being the same as the width of the bottom of the thigh, it's gonna look stumpy. That's the foot. And it's gonna look more like just like a straight cylinder than it does a leg. So you want to make sure it tapers off towards the bottom and it's going to look more right. And that's also why it helps to draw these like cutoff points, because then you could establish or just like measure by the eye, like, okay, if it was to fit into the leg, the foot has to be this wide, just as wide as where it tapers off on the leg. And that helps you, as opposed to like if you were to draw the leg and then you draw the foot and it's too big, you know. So this line right here helps guide to make sure that when you're first starting out drawing the foot, that it matches, and then from there you could shape it out to be about the same proportion. Just gonna give it a little bit more definition. Then I'll move on to drawing more dynamic poses using these cylinder shapes. Also notice that when you're drawing the head in 3/4 view, that the back of the head isn't coming out, right? Because that would imply that it's turning even more, or it's more profile view. Whereas in 3/4 view, it's hiding behind the head, like a little bit past the ear, of where the ear begins. So yeah, that's another thing to look out for. You don't want to extend the skull way too much when you're drawing it in 3/4 view. And really depends on the tilt of the head and how you want it. Like if you did want to have it in 3/4 in profile view, then yeah, you would have to change that around a bit. And just to demonstrate to you guys the difference, as you can see, you start out with the circle, and this is where the chin is, and the jawline, and the chin.
And I see the same thing for these music sample packs.
And this is where the ear is, so you could see that the skull jots out more. And then the neckline isn't like at the front of the chin. It's about like halfway.
And being consumer is not problematic in itself, but falling into these traps of something that is not you.
And we'll get to the head eventually, and I'll show you guys tricks and tips on drawing it proportionally as well. But yeah, just wanted to demonstrate the difference between like 3/4 view, profile view, and how the neck is drawn to make it look correct. You don't want to do it all the way to the front. It's just gonna look kind of strange. So it's like a little bit in between the points of the jawline. Whereas here you could see that the end of the other side of the neck
If I had to say one more thing on the subject,
is just right about where the jawline ends and the ear begins. And over here, once it turns more, you could see more of the neck.
But then you have an accidental hit on YouTube. They step out there and then they're like, wow, I didn't know that. And then they'll shift towards that. Which of course it's problematic because it creates more pressure to create more things like that, right, when it's an accident. To realize that who you are and what you may succeed at, what people may love most about you, may be very, very different than how you see yourself.
Alright, and now moving on to a little bit more of a dynamic pose. Let's see if we could. Goal is going to be to fit it within this little section. And to do that, like we were discussing before, you want to make sure that you sketch it out real quick. Give it like these like basic shapes, these blocks. Quick loose lines, not getting bogged down by detail. using cylinder shapes to define more parts. Sometimes it's easier to just do stick figures too, just so that you could establish the pose, the feeling, the gesture of the figure. And then from there, you could start putting in more shape. But this is primarily just to make sure that it all fits within this limit that you've set yourself. It's good practice too, just so that you could, you could keep an eye on making sure that everything fits within the limit that you set for yourself. And should you draw it a little smaller, and so on. So I would say, it's great to just do quick gestures, use basic shapes. As you can see, I'm not really going in too much detail here, but I am using, for instance, to draw quickly triangle shapes to draw for the feet. You want to simplify it for yourself as much as possible to create the skeletal structure. And then for the hands, it's kind of similar. It's like a cone shape. But as you guys can see, most of the body can be condensed into just basic shapes, simple forms. So now that we kind of got the gesture itself, I'm just going to sketch out arm more. Give it mittens. That's the simple form. So from what we were learning in a previous stream, you want to make sure that the hands aren't too big. So if your head is, since you started out with this size, you want to make sure that the hands are never about the same size as the head. They're about 3/4 the size of the head, sometimes a little bit less, but never the same size. It's gonna look weird. The same thing with the feet, when we were talking about, just to review. See, this is the benefit of it, is that you could flip back and you could be oh, right, this is the right measurement. So as you could see, the foot is about the same size. It shouldn't be bigger, way bigger. It's just jutting out just at the tip. But for the most part, the foot is about as long as the head, so you don't want to make it too big. And the hand, again, isn't reaching the top of the head. It's about 3/4 the size of the head. So that's something to look out for when you're doing these quick sketches. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. For some of you, it's different, I'm sure. Is this way too much information in a short period of time? Is it good enough? Because I can go on. I could talk about all these tiny little details, and it could be a little bit overwhelming. Just wanted to see how you guys are feeling about it so far. And I'm sure it varies to some, but feedback is always welcome. So if you guys are tuning in just now, you can always leave it in the comments. You can connect in social media. I have all the links on the Twitch channel, so you guys can check those out. You could leave comments there, feedback there. You could talk about what you are currently struggling with when it comes to drawing. Like, what are you having a difficult time getting right, or what are some roadblocks you're coming across whenever you're drawing anatomy, and we can discuss it in chat, and I can give you guys some pointers about how you can get better, maybe draw some examples to demonstrate ways you can fix it. So now that I've established these limits and created these guidelines, this like blueprint, literally, you can start shaping it a little bit more, giving it more definition. And this is the great part about having to establish these limits as well, is that once you do, you can kind of just jump around all over the figure. If you get too bogged down by detail, or it's just not coming out as great, you can move on to like a different part. Like, okay, I was getting a little too carried away with the hand. Let's see if I could define the waist more. I'm going to draw it through just for example's sake. The forearm is a cylinder shape as well. And this is the kind of like, this is the gesture drawing I was talking about. Like, this is the gesture of the body. It's kind of bowed, right? It's off balance. It's kind of like falling over. So it's kind of good to do that as well. You know, if you're starting out the drawing, this is what I mean by like gesture. You're establishing the motion of the figure. So it's something as simple as that. You're not really going in too much detail, but here is the framework for it. So just like building a building, you know, you don't start putting in the bricks right away. You first put on, like, bring up the beams, right? And this is kind of what it is. These are like the beams of the building. So that once you start laying the bricks, you don't go too far to the left, too far to the right. You know exactly that. No, it's supposed to be within this limit of the beams. And it's a very similar process to that, right? It's like once you establish the beams, then you put on the bricks, you add the timber, and then you start like decorating the interior and the exterior. So it's the same idea here. You're also doing that. You're first establishing the framework, then you're putting in a little bit more detail and the shapes. So you're just building on top of everything, further and further and further. It's like a step-by-step process. I think it's so interesting that this process is common in pretty much most things, you know, whether it's architecture, whether it's music, whether it's writing as well. You know, with writing, you're starting out with like a draft. You could just write things out without having to really think about punctuations and paragraphs and all that other stuff, just so that you could get the idea out, just so that you can have something to work with in the beginning. And then from there, you can take little pieces here and there, cut them out, remove this, remove that, but the framework is there for you to work within. And then you just keep building on top of it until you have yourself a page, 2 pages, 3 pages, whatever. And it's just this common process amongst all these things that are different, you know, the different mediums, different results, really, but they're all very, very important. I think it's this like transcendental element that's really interesting. Yeah, I think it's also similar in chess as well. You know, like for instance, you start out the game, most professional chess players, they'll already have like a framework of where they want the board to look like. So they'll move all the pieces quickly, knowing that, you know, this is gonna be what I'm looking for. And then once they get to that stage, then from there they start to build strategies on what to do next. So you establish yourself like a draft to work with, and then from there you start adding more complex ideas, details, etc. So just like it is with this. If you guys have questions about parts of the body that I'm developing that can help you improve, you could post that as well in the comments, and I'll write you guys back, or I'll discuss it in the stream, on the next stream. If you guys are copying this stuff, another helpful tip, and when it comes to ensuring accuracy, is the space relationship between objects. So in this case, let's just say that the arm is the object. It's a cylinder shape, and you could look at it and the reference, and you could be like, well, how far is this line from this line, and compare it, look back and forth, and be like, is it too wide? You know, is it extremely narrow in comparison to the reference? And look back and forth, because again, despite knowing these measurements, specific measurements, it's another thing for your hand and your eye and your mind kind of to translate everything onto the paper. So use all these tools together, knowing that the proportion, knowing that, okay, once I draw the head, then from the tip of the neck, or from the chin down to the chest, that's about a head. So let's do that. Let's look at that again. From here to here is about the same. So that's the tip of the chin, and it's right about to where the chest is, which is right here. And then from there, right, establish that. That's established to like the waist, about right. And then from from the waist down to like the groin, it's about right. From the groin down to like where the leg is, or the knee is rather, that's another one. So you could see little by little, and I highly encourage to do that, because it's not just about the drawing, it's also memorizing these measurements. And once you memorize them, it becomes easier. Like, it becomes another tool that you can use to ensure you're drawing right. So like, just like using the space recognition between objects as a way of like ensuring accuracy, you could also then move on to the next tool and be like, okay, well, I remember that unit of measurement for the head is, from the chin down to the chest, that's another head. Is it the same? And then it'll just come to you automatically. Like we were talking about in the previous stream, it's like tying your shoe, right? You learn these techniques, you learn these methods, and the first few times that you do it, you think about it, like, oh, you do this, you do that, and you pull, and then eventually you don't think about it anymore, right? So it's the same idea. These are your tools, these are your little techniques and methods to ensure that it's accurate. So like we were saying earlier, you want to make sure that from the knee area, it's not the same width as you get down to the bottom where the ankle is. Right, and there shouldn't be too much of a difference. Granted, this is at an angle, this is foreshortened, because it's coming more towards you, it's facing more towards you. This is like where the knee is right here. So it will be a little bit shorter than it would be if you were to do it straight on. So, and from here down to here, it's supposed to be one head. Well, to like where the calf is, really. So from here, from the knee to where the calf is, you can see it's about right, for the sake of demonstrating it. All right, for the numbers here, you can see that it's like 1 and then 2 little lines. So from like 0, or even the tip of the ruler, to like 1 and like 2 lines. So yep, that's one head for where the calf is. And then from where the calf is to the bottom, that should be where the foot is as well. But it's in perspective, it's not flat. It's gonna be longer. As you can see, I'm not really following the exact guidelines that I drew before with the gesture lines, like when I was doing this, because it's not supposed to be incredibly accurate. That's the whole point of it. It's supposed to be loose. It's supposed to give you some sort of framework to work within. And then from there, you can start adding in more details and shifting it a little bit if you want it to look better, for instance. And I'll show you guys another perfect example of another tool, like we were discussing before. The first tool was the measurements, right? Using the head as the measurements, figuring out how it fits into the body, fits within the framework that you were working on. Then we talked about the space difference, right? The relationship between objects and the space between them as another method to make sure that you're drawing it correctly. And now I'll show you guys. We're going to taper it off towards the ankle. From the knee, it's pretty wide as the thigh, where the knee starts. And then all the way down, it tapers off pretty narrow, where the ankle is. And this is the foot. Kind of off balance, trying to capture or catch himself a little bit. So here is the other method. This is the negative space. So you're drawing the reference. You want to make sure it's as accurate as possible. You're training your eye to make sure that it's in sync with your hand or what you're seeing, and memorizing to draw on the paper. And that is the negative space. Let's take a look right here. This right here. Maybe I can do it with a darker pencil. This right here is your negative space. Now it's just like this shape that you're drawing. Rather than think of it as like part of the leg, you're drawing this shape. Kind of looks like a flame, you know, if you were to like really look at it. Or just imagine it to be something else, so that when your eye moves from the reference to the paper, you come back to it, you can be like, oh, where's the flame shape? And then you could look at it and try to draw that. And this ensures that it's more accurate, that it is very much like the other one, like the reference. So just methods, just ways that tools, you could look at it as tools again to ensure accuracy. And it's also training your creativity, right? Like trying to think of like, what does this abstract shape kind of resemble? What does it look like? So once you recognize that, it becomes easier for your eye to focus on. And it's also a way of refreshing your perspective. You know, you could get bogged down a little bit too much by the details. You can get bogged down by the figure, or like focusing too much on, am I drawing the leg right? Whereas you could just switch that off for a minute and look at it as like, am I drawing this abstract shape correctly? And then if you're really into, like, let's say drawing portraits and drawing people's faces, it's a great way to ensure that you also get that down accurately and you get it as realistic as possible by using all these different little tools that you have in your head now. Head measurement, the space relationship between objects, negative space. Like, all these things really help improve your accuracy. I'm kind of enjoying this pencil. Go along with it. But now we have like a complete drawing. Okay? We started out with something so loose as this, just a gesture, a stick figure to give yourself an idea, and then it turned into a more substantial figure. just like a building. It started out with a couple of beams. We laid on some bricks and eventually worked on the exterior. And now we have a structure. Alright guys, I'm going to cut it off here. I'm going to take a 15-minute break to come back for the next stream, which is drawing comics. And I'll be drawing John Buscema's Conan the Barbarian, which I'm looking forward to. If you guys like this content, hit the subscribe button. You'll get notification. You'll know when I'm going live. And join the social media. You guys can talk about your different methods and different ways that you've improved your drawing, what you've learned as far as anatomy goes, how you've improved, what kind of books you use or what kind of references that you use, just so that you guys can interact with each other and learn from each other as well. And hopefully I learn from you as well too.